The words came out during what should have been an ordinary family dinner. We were eating spaghetti and meatballs, my 5-year-old daughter Chloe's favorite meal, when she suddenly pushed her plate away and stared at it with genuine horror. "Can't eat this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why not, sweetheart? You love spaghetti." "Because someone put poison in my food before. Someone who was supposed to love me." My husband David and I exchanged concerned glances. "Poison?" "Chloe, nobody would put poison in your food. Not my food now. My food when I was Eleanor." Eleanor, a name she had never mentioned before. A name that carried weight in her small voice, like she was speaking about someone she had known intimately. "Who is Eleanor, honey?" "Me. Before I was Chloe. When I lived in the big house with Uncle Charles." She said it so matter-of-factly, like having a previous identity was as normal as having different clothes for different seasons. Uncle Charles put the poison in Eleanor's soup because he wanted all of Eleanor's papa's money. My blood turned to ice. My 5-year-old daughter was describing being murdered for inheritance money by a family member in a previous life. "My name is Julia, and this is the story of how my daughter Chloe revealed memories of being poisoned by her own uncle in the 1930s, memories so detailed and historically accurate that they led us to uncover a century-old murder that was never solved, and a truth that had been buried along with its victim." Chloe had always been unusual about food, not picky in the typical way children can be about vegetables or new flavors. She was suspicious, paranoid even. She would inspect every meal carefully before taking a bite, as if checking for something that shouldn't be there. "What are you looking for, Chloe?" I would ask when I caught her examining her cereal for the 3rd time. "Making sure it's safe," she would reply seriously. "Safe from what?" "Bad things that people might put in food to hurt you. What 5-year-old worries about their food being tampered with?" But Chloe did. Constantly. She refused to eat anything that someone else had prepared unless she watched them make it from start to finish. School lunches were out of the question. "I don't know those people in the kitchen," she would explain when I asked why she wouldn't eat the cafeteria food. "They might be like Uncle Charles." Uncle Charles again, a name that appeared frequently in her explanations for various fears and behaviors. "Who is Uncle Charles, Chloe?" "The bad man who pretended to love Eleanor but really just wanted her money." "Tell me about Eleanor." Eleanor was 9 years old and lived in a really big house with lots of rooms. Her papa was very rich because he owned factories. "Where was Eleanor's mama?" Mama died when Eleanor was little, so it was just Eleanor and Papa and Uncle Charles. "What was Uncle Charles like?" "He smiled a lot, but his eyes were mean, and he was always asking Papa about the will." The will. A 5-year-old was discussing legal documents and inheritance with sophisticated understanding. "What's a will, Chloe?" "It's the paper that says who gets your money when you die. Papa's will said everything would go to Eleanor when she grew up." "Did Uncle Charles like that?" "No. Uncle Charles thought he should get the money because he was Papa's brother. But Papa said Eleanor was more important than anyone else in the world." "How did Uncle Charles feel about Eleanor?" "He pretended to be nice to her. He would bring her presents and read her stories. But Eleanor could tell he didn't really love her." "How could she tell?" "Because when Papa wasn't looking, Uncle Charles's face would change. He would look at Eleanor like she was something bad that needed to go away." The psychological insight was chilling, a child's intuitive understanding of adult deception and malice. But this level of sophistication seemed impossible for a 5-year-old. "What happened to Eleanor's papa?" "Papa got sick. Really sick. He had to stay in bed all the time, and the doctor came to visit every day." "What kind of sick?" "The kind that makes you cough blood and get really skinny. Papa said his lungs weren't working right. Tuberculosis, or lung cancer. Diseases that were often fatal in the early to mid-20th century." "How long was Papa sick?" "A long time. Almost a year. And Uncle Charles took care of everything while Papa was sick." Everything? The money, the factories, the house. Uncle Charles said he was helping, but really he was learning how to take over. What happened when Papa died? Eleanor was very sad. She cried for days and days, but Uncle Charles said not to worry because he would take care of her. Did Uncle Charles take care of Eleanor? Chloe's expression grew dark. At first he was nice. He let Eleanor have anything she wanted. He hired a tutor to teach her at home. He bought her beautiful dresses and toys. That sounds like he was taking care of her. But then Eleanor heard Uncle Charles talking to his lawyer friend. What did they say? They said Eleanor was worth more dead than alive. They said if something happened to Eleanor, Uncle Charles would get everything because he was the only family left. The conversation was becoming increasingly disturbing, not just because of the content, but because of Chloe's mature understanding of the implications. What did Eleanor do when she heard this? She tried to be very careful. She locked her bedroom door at night. She only ate food that the cook made when Uncle Charles wasn't watching. Was Eleanor scared? Very scared. But she didn't have anywhere to go. All of Papa's friends thought Uncle Charles was wonderful for taking care of his poor little niece. What happened next? Uncle Charles got tired of waiting. He decided to make Eleanor sick. How? He put poison in her soup on a cold winter day when the cook had gone home early. What kind of poison? The kind that makes your tummy hurt really bad and makes you throw up everything you try to eat. Uncle Charles said it was probably influenza. Arsenic. The symptoms Chloe was describing matched arsenic poisoning, a common method of murder in the early 20th century because it mimicked natural illness. Did Eleanor know she was being poisoned? Not at first. But when she kept getting sicker and sicker, even though Uncle Charles was giving her medicine, she figured it out. What did she do? She tried to tell the doctor. But Uncle Charles was always in the room when the doctor came, and the doctor thought Eleanor was just delirious from being sick. Did anyone believe Eleanor? No. Uncle Charles was very good at acting worried and sad. Everyone thought he was the perfect guardian, who was doing everything he could to save his poor sick niece. How long was Eleanor sick? 3 weeks, getting weaker and weaker every day. Uncle Charles would bring her soup and medicine, and Eleanor would pretend to take them. But it was too late. She was already too sick. What happened when Eleanor died? Uncle Charles cried at the funeral. Big, loud sobs that made everyone feel sorry for him. But Eleanor was watching from above, and she could see that his tears weren't real. Eleanor watched her own funeral? Yes. Dead people can see everything that happens after they die. Eleanor watched Uncle Charles inherit all of Papa's money. She watched him sell the big house and move to a different city. How did Eleanor feel about that? Angry. Really, really angry. Because Uncle Charles got away with murder, and nobody knew the truth. Is that why you remember being Eleanor? Because she was angry? Maybe. Or maybe Eleanor just wanted someone to know what really happened. The story was becoming more complex and emotionally sophisticated with each telling. But it was also becoming more specific, more verifiable. Chloe. Do you remember Eleanor's full name? Eleanor Margaret Whitmore. Do you remember what city she lived in? A big city with lots of factories and smoke, where it snowed in the winter and got really hot in the summer? Do you remember what the factories made? Steel. Papa's factories made steel for buildings and bridges. A steel magnate family in the industrial era, possibly Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cleveland, or another major industrial center. Do you remember what year Eleanor died? I don't know years. But it was when there were lots of people without jobs and not enough food to go around. The Great Depression, 1930s America, when industrial fortunes were common, but economic hardship was widespread. Chloe, do you remember Uncle Charles's full name? Charles Henry Whitmore. He was Papa's younger brother. Charles Henry Whitmore, A specific, searchable name, a potential thread to pull that might unravel this impossible story. That evening, after Chloe had gone to bed, I found myself doing something I never thought I would do. Researching my 5-year-old daughter's claims about being murdered in a previous life. I started with basic searches: Eleanor Margaret Whitmore and Charles Henry Whitmore and steel industry 1930s. What I found made my hands shake. A obituary from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, dated February 18, 1934. Eleanor Margaret Whitmore, 9, daughter of the late industrialist Robert Whitmore, died yesterday at the family estate after a brief illness. The child had been under the care of her uncle, Charles Henry Whitmore, since her father's death from tuberculosis in 1933. Eleanor Margaret Whitmore. Age 9. Died 1934. Father Robert Whitmore, tuberculosis victim. Uncle Charles Henry Whitmore as guardian. Every major detail that Chloe had provided. I kept reading with trembling fingers. Eleanor was the sole heir to the Whitmore steel fortune, estimated at over $2 million at the time of her father's death. With her passing, the estate now falls to Charles Henry Whitmore, Robert's surviving brother. Sole heir, $2 million inheritance. Now transferred to Uncle Charles. Exactly what Chloe had described. The child's death was attributed to influenza, though. She had been in declining health for several weeks prior to her passing. Influenza. The cover story Uncle Charles had used to explain Eleanor's poisoning symptoms. Services will be held Friday at First Presbyterian Church. Charles Henry Whitmore expressed his profound grief at the loss of his beloved niece, whom he described as the light of our family's future, beloved niece. The perfect performance of a grieving uncle that Eleanor had described watching from beyond death. But there was more. I found additional articles about the Whitmore family spanning several years. Robert Whitmore had indeed been a steel industry magnate, owner of Whitmore Steelworks. He had died of tuberculosis in October 1933, leaving behind his 9-year-old daughter Eleanor as his sole heir. Charles Henry Whitmore had been appointed as Eleanor's guardian and executor of the estate. Eleanor had died 4 months later under mysterious circumstances. The more I researched, the more details emerged that matched Chloe's accounts. The Whitmore estate had been a massive mansion in Pittsburgh's affluent Shadyside neighborhood. Charles had indeed sold the property shortly after Eleanor's death and moved to New York City. He had liquidated Whitmore Steelworks and invested the proceeds in real estate and securities. Within 5 years of Eleanor's death, Charles Whitmore had become one of the wealthiest men in New York. But what struck me most was what I didn't find. No investigation into Eleanor's death, no questions raised about the convenient timing of her illness, no suspicion directed toward the uncle who inherited millions upon her death. In 1934, a child's death from influenza was commonplace enough to raise no red flags, especially when the grieving guardian appeared so devastated by the loss. Eleanor's murder had been perfect, and Charles Henry Whitmore had gotten away with it completely. Tupori. Next morning, I called the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh to inquire about historical records. I'm researching the Whitmore family from the 1930s, I told the librarian. Specifically Eleanor Margaret Whitmore. Oh, the steel heiress. Yes, we have quite a bit of material on that family. Tragic story, the little girl dying so young. Do you have medical records or death certificates? We have some newspaper archives and estate documents that became public record. Would you like me to pull what we have? Yes, please. Especially anything related to Eleanor's final illness. I should mention, there was always some local speculation about that death. My heart stopped. What kind of speculation? Well, you have to understand, this was during the Depression. People were very aware of money and who had it. Some folks thought it was awfully convenient that the little heiress died so soon after her father, leaving everything to the uncle. Was there ever an investigation? Not officially. Charles Whitmore was well connected, and the attending physician attributed the death to natural causes. But there were whispers. What kind of whispers? That the child had been asking her doctor about poison, that she'd been trying to tell people her uncle was making her sick. But she was just a 9-year-old girl with a fever. Nobody took her seriously. Eleanor had tried to tell people, just as Chloe had described, but nobody had believed a sick child's accusations against her caring guardian. Is there anything else in the records that might be relevant? Actually, yes. There's a letter in the estate files, written by Eleanor to her father's lawyer just days before she died. What did the letter say? She was asking for help, said she was scared of her uncle and wanted to go live with her father's business partner instead. But the letter wasn't delivered until after her death, when they were sorting through her personal effects. A final desperate attempt to save herself. A cry for help that arrived too late. Would it be possible for me to see these documents? Certainly. We're open to researchers by appointment. That weekend, David and I drove to Pittsburgh. We told Chloe we were going to see where Eleanor used to live. Her reaction was immediate and intense. "I don't want to go back there," she said, her voice small and frightened. "Why not, sweetheart?" "Because Uncle Charles might still be there." "Uncle Charles died a long time ago, honey. He can't hurt anyone anymore." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. We're just going to see Eleanor's house and learn more about her story." "Will you protect me if I get scared?" "Always." The drive to Pittsburgh took 6 hours. As we approached the city, Chloe became increasingly agitated. "The air smells like fire," she said, though Pittsburgh's steel industry had largely disappeared decades earlier. "Do you recognize anything?" "The rivers." Eleanor's house was near where the rivers come together. The confluence of the Allegheny, Monongahela, and Ohio rivers. The heart of Pittsburgh's geography. Which neighborhood? The one with the big houses and lots of trees. Where rich people lived, Shadyside, where the historical records indicated the Whitmore estate had been located. We drove through Shadyside slowly, Chloe staring out the window with intense concentration. "That way," she pointed suddenly. Eleanor's house was that way. We followed her directions down tree-lined streets of magnificent old mansions. "There," she said, pointing to a massive Tudor-style estate. "That's where Eleanor lived." I checked the address against my research notes. 47 Fifth Avenue, the former location of the Whitmore estate. The mansion that now stood there had been built in the 1950s, after Charles had sold the original property, but Chloe was staring at it, with recognition. "It looks different," she said. "Smaller. Eleanor's house had more windows and a bigger garden." "Do you remember anything specific about the inside of Eleanor's house?" The dining room had a big long table where Eleanor ate by herself after Papa died, and there was a library with books that went all the way to the ceiling. "What about Eleanor's bedroom?" "Upstairs, at the end of the hall, with windows that looked out at the garden. Eleanor used to sit by those windows and read books about faraway places." "Is this making you sad, being here?" "A little, but also happy." "Why happy?" "Because now someone else lives here, children who are safe and loved." "How do you know children live here?" "I can see toys in the backyard." I looked more carefully, and indeed saw playground equipment behind the house. A swing set, a trampoline, a sandbox. Signs of a happy childhood that Eleanor had never gotten to complete. From Shadyside, we drove to the Carnegie Library to examine the historical documents. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, had pulled an extensive collection of materials related to the Whitmore family. Newspaper clippings, estate records, business documents, and personal correspondence. Among the papers was Eleanor's final letter, written in a child's careful cursive on monogram stationery. "Dear Mr. Thompson, Papa said you were his best friend, and that you would always help our family if we needed you. I need help now. Uncle Charles is making me sick. He gives me medicine, but I think it's poison. I don't want to die like Papa did. Can you please come get me? I promise I'll be good. Love, Eleanor Whitmore P.S. Please hurry. I'm getting sicker every day. The letter was dated February 15th, 1934, 3 days before Eleanor's death. A final, desperate plea that had arrived too late to save her. Chloe read the letter silently, her lips moving as she sounded out the words. That's Eleanor's handwriting, she said matter-of-factly. How do you know? Because I remember writing that letter. Eleanor was very scared when she wrote it. Do you remember Mr. Thompson? He was Papa's business partner. Eleanor thought he might help her because he used to bring her presents when Papa was alive. Why didn't Eleanor try to run away? Where could she go? Uncle Charles told everyone that Eleanor was very sick and needed to stay in bed. If she tried to leave, people would just bring her back. Did Eleanor know she was going to die? By the end, yes. She was too weak to fight anymore, but she hoped that someday someone would figure out the truth. Is that why you remember being Eleanor? I think so. Eleanor's spirit was too angry to rest. She wanted justice. Do you still feel angry? Sometimes. But mostly I feel sad for the little girl who never got to grow up. We spent several hours at the library, going through documents and newspaper accounts. Everything corroborated Chloe's memories of Eleanor's life and death. The timeline, the family relationships, the financial motives, the circumstances of the death. All of it matched perfectly. But the most chilling discovery came in a collection of Charles Henry, Whitmore's personal papers that had been donated to the library years later. Among his effects were detailed financial records showing how he had systematically planned to acquire the Whitmore fortune, notes about Eleanor's inheritance, correspondence with lawyers about guardianship laws, research into untraceable poisons, and most damning of all, a journal entry dated February 20th, 1934, 2 days after Eleanor's death. The child is finally gone. Took longer than expected, but the symptoms appeared natural enough. Doctor suspects nothing. Estate transfer should be complete within the month. Robert would be disappointed in my methods, but he should have thought of that before leaving everything to a child. Written proof of premeditated murder. Evidence that Charles Henry Whitmore had indeed poisoned his 9-year-old niece for her inheritance. Evidence that had remained hidden for nearly 90 years. Mrs. Patterson, I said, showing her the journal. Entry. Has anyone else ever seen this? I don't think so. These papers were donated in the 1970s by Charles Whitmore's estate. They've been cataloged but rarely requested. This is evidence of murder. Yes, it appears to be, though obviously too late for any legal action, but not too late for the truth. No, not too late for that. That evening we returned to our hotel and discussed what we had discovered. Chloe, I said gently, we found proof that Uncle Charles really did poison Eleanor. I know, she said simply. Eleanor could see him writing in his journal after she died. She knew he was writing down what he did. How does it feel to know that people finally believe Eleanor's story? Good. Eleanor was telling the truth, but nobody listened. Are you still angry about what happened to Eleanor? Not as angry as before, because now Eleanor's story isn't a secret anymore. What do you think should happen with this information? People should know, so that other children don't get hurt by uncles who pretend to love them. Do you think Eleanor can rest now? I think so. Eleanor just wanted someone to know that she was murdered. Now you know, and other people will know too. The next day, we contacted a local historian who specialized in Pittsburgh's industrial families. Dr. Margaret Thornton was fascinated by our discoveries. This is extraordinary, she said after reviewing the documents. The Whitmore case has been a mystery for decades. Eleanor's death always seemed suspicious, but there was never any evidence. What will you do with this information? With your permission, I'd like to write a historical article about the case. It's important documentation of how children's voices were dismissed during that era. Would that help other people? Absolutely. This case illustrates how financial motives can corrupt family relationships and how society failed to protect vulnerable children. Eleanor would like that, Chloe said. She wants people to learn from what happened to her. 6 months later, Dr. Thornton published her article in the Journal of Pittsburgh History. The Eleanor Whitmore Murder, a case study in Depression-era child abuse and financial exploitation. The article generated significant interest in local historical circles and led to a re-examination of other suspicious deaths during the same period. Eleanor's story had finally been told. Her truth had finally been acknowledged, and her murder had finally been exposed. But perhaps more importantly, Chloe's memories of being Eleanor gradually began to fade, not immediately, but slowly, as if Eleanor's spirit could finally rest now that justice had been served in the court of history. I don't remember being Eleanor as much anymore, Chloe told me recently. Does that make you sad? A little, but also relieved. Why relieved? Because carrying someone else's anger is heavy. I'm glad Eleanor can let go of it now. What did you learn from remembering Eleanor's life? That it's important to listen to children, even when what they're saying sounds impossible. Anything else? That family doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. How does that make you feel? Grateful. Because you and Daddy really do protect me. Eleanor wasn't that lucky. Do you think Eleanor chose you to tell her story? Maybe. Or maybe I chose to remember Eleanor because her story needed to be told. Why was it important for Eleanor's story to be told? Because the truth doesn't disappear just because people don't want to hear it. It waits until someone is brave enough to speak it. Today, Chloe is 8 years old. She no longer speaks about being Eleanor or Uncle Charles or the poisoned soup, but she has retained certain characteristics that seem to echo Eleanor's experience. She's extraordinarily perceptive about adults' true intentions. She's protective of other children who seem vulnerable or afraid. She has an unusual understanding of justice and truth-telling, and she still inspects her food carefully before eating, though now it seems more like habit than fear. "Mama," she said to me last week, "do you think there are other children who remember being hurt in their past lives?" There might be. Why? Because maybe they need help telling their stories too. Would you want to help them? Yes. Because Eleanor taught me that some secrets are too important to keep hidden. What kind of secrets? The ones about children being hurt by people who should love them. Those secrets need to become stories so that other children can stay safe. How would you help tell those stories? By listening. By believing. By not giving up until the truth comes out. The wisdom of an 8-year-old who has carried the memories of a murdered child, who has been the voice for someone silenced by poison and power, who has learned that love and family can be complicated, dangerous, even deadly, but who has also learned that truth has a way of surviving even the most carefully planned cover-ups. Tonight, as I write this, Chloe is sleeping peacefully in her bed, no longer haunted by memories of being Eleanor, no longer carrying the anger of a child who died, seeking justice, just Chloe, safe, loved, protected, everything Eleanor should have been, but never got the chance to be. But sometimes, when Chloe thinks I'm not watching, I catch her reading the newspaper article about Eleanor's case. "Are you proud of what we accomplished?" I asked her once. Yes, but mostly I'm proud of Eleanor. Why? Because even after she died, she never stopped trying to tell the truth. And now the truth is out there. Yes. And maybe it will help protect other children from uncles like Charles. Do you think Eleanor would be happy knowing her story helped other people? I think Eleanor would be happy knowing that someone finally listened. So I ask you this. When a 5-year-old child describes being poisoned by a family member with details that match historical records perfectly, when they know names, dates, locations, and motives that were never publicly documented, when they carry memories of murder that belong to someone who died decades before they were born, when they somehow become the voice for a victim whose story was buried with their body, do you dismiss it as imagination? Or do you consider that maybe consciousness survives physical death? That injustice creates memories too powerful to be erased? That murdered children might find ways to speak through the innocent voices of the living? That truth has a way of refusing to stay buried even when it's been poisoned and silenced. I used to think death was the end of accountability. Now I know that some crimes echo across lifetimes, that murder victims don't always rest quietly in their graves, that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice transformed. Sometimes it takes a century and a child's impossible memories to expose a killer. Sometimes the dead choose the living to be their witnesses. And sometimes, if we're brave enough to listen, the silenced find their voices again. Eleanor Margaret Whitmore was murdered by her Uncle Charles for money in 1934. For 90 years, he got away with it. But truth has a way of outliving its silencers. And love has a way of outliving its destroyers. Some poisons kill the body, but no poison is strong enough to kill the truth. The rest is just patience, and the dead have all the time in the world.